Welcome to Tycoons of Small Biz, a podcast where small business owners are celebrated as the backbone of the American economy. Each week, we introduce you to tycoons who share their stories and advice so that small business owners may learn from their experiences. Tycoons is powered by Backbone Planning Partners, FinTrepid Solutions, and Pivotal Advisors. Join us now as our hosts connect you to today's tycoons.
Good afternoon, Tycoons. Welcome to this episode of Tycoons of Small Biz. I will be your host today, Landon Mance. Austin is frolicking around Washington, D.C. at a conference all week. So I got the pleasure of filling in for him for a really awesome, special conversation today. So if it's your first time joining Tycoons, thank you. You know, Tycoons, we're in this about 2.5 years, 120, 125-ish episodes and counting. You know, it's put on by small business owners for small business owners. And really, you know, we started Tycoons to provide a platform for, you know, the small businesses who we believe are the backbone of the American economy. Usually the companies that are getting all the glitz and the glamour are the, you know, 100 million, 500 million, $10 billion, you know, exits and, you know, big corporations. And we're bringing on, you know, Main Street businesses every single week to talk about their successes. And occasionally we are fortunate enough to bring on just a really impactful nonprofit. And today, that is very much what this conversation will be centered around. So we've got the pleasure of Steven Nisbet joining us. He is the president and the co-founder of Shields and Stripes. And they are a 501c3 that provides therapeutic and health services to first responders, active duty military members, and veterans. Steve, thank you so much for being here, man. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. It's my pleasure, and happy to spend this afternoon just talking a little bit about the business myself and connecting with everybody on here.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first and foremost, you know, you served for 16 years in the Air Force. You've got some pretty cool stories. You shared a couple of those with us kind of offline as we were getting to know you a bit. So thank you. We've got deep gratitude and respect for our servicemen and women, past, current, and future. And we pray for you guys every single night. And we pray that young folks continue to get inspired, you know, to join the armed services so that people like myself can, and the people listening can live in the best country in the world. So thank you for your service, man. Much appreciated.
Thank you. It was my pleasure. I got to scratch just about every itch that I wanted and didn't want. So it was a pleasure serving, and now I get an opportunity to help the others that are in still and coming out.
Yeah, absolutely. And we want to hear all about that. But before we do, I assume that you weren't, you know, born into being a pararescueman. You know, I think you had to be of age to be doing that. So leading up to that pivotal point in your life, you know, when you decided to join the Air Force, talk to us about this, Steve. You know, before that, you know, where'd you grow up? Brothers and sisters? Tell us about your parents. You know, education, stuff you like to do outside of work, just anything about your background that's important that you want to share with us.
Yeah, great question. So I was born in Aurora, Colorado, spent a few years there. My dad was in the Air Force as a security forces police officer, and then he got out to spend more time with the family. So I've got actually a twin brother and an older brother. So after a few years in Colorado, we ended up moving down to Tucson, Arizona, where I spent the rest of my childhood before I ended up joining the military. Grew up down there. My dad had spent his entire career and the next 20 plus years in law enforcement down there in Tucson, and eventually taking over the gang task force unit, where he spent a majority of his career, and really started to that kind of started to shape my path, where I spent a lot of time doing the Explorers Club and looking at becoming a police officer, and following my dad's footsteps, and then also get spending the time around my friends. A lot of my friends in high school were focusing, they were very intelligent individuals, and I was not. So they went into engineering and whatnot. And I was like, well, that's what all my friends are doing. But my dad was a police officer, and it seemed like two opposite spectrums of directions that I wanted to go. And so trying to figure out what it was that I wanted. As I graduated high school, I spent my entire career, or sorry, my entire childhood playing soccer. So I had this dream and this goal to become a professional soccer player, and no scouts were really coming out to Tucson, Arizona, looking at Santa Rita High School and going, this is the next star in Major League Soccer. So didn't really have any scouts coming and looking at me, and no scholarships. And so it's just, what am I going to do with my life? I have, I want to hang out with my friends and do this engineering thing, but I actually have no interest in doing that. I just want to be around my friends. And then I have a pathway of being a police officer like my dad, but that doesn't seem like something I really wanted to. Like, this still wasn't my passion. But I wanted to become a professional soccer player. I didn't know what to do, so I was like, you know what? I'm just going to go to college for a little bit. I really enjoy space, stars, and stuff like that, and astronomy. So I actually went to school at Peterson Community College for astronomy. And as I showed up to school in classes, and I looked around at who was around me, it was a lot of elderly folk, and I was 18, and like, man, what am I doing here? This is not it. This is not the place for me to be. And there's a lot more to me out there. And so talked to my dad and my parents about joining the military. I went to a recruiter, an Air Force recruiter, because I knew I wanted to be in the Air Force. That's just the lineage that I came from my grandfather, my dad, and now me. And so I went to the recruiter, and I was like, what can I do? Scored really well on the ASVAB, and they offered me a lot of position, a lot of job opportunities. And one of them was to become a nuclear weapons apprentice. And there I saw the path. I was like, you know what? I'm going to become a nuclear weapons apprentice. I'm going to get out and I'm going to go work for Raytheon. And bam, I'm back with my friends. I'm back to hanging out with my boys. That's an easy way to do it. I didn't get a scholarship to become an engineer, but I'm going to get the military to teach me. And then I'm going to do it for 4 years. I'm going to get them to pay me to go to school for the GI Bill, and I'm good. And so as I selected that career path in the Air Force, I walked out of the office feeling really good, feeling like I had a goal ahead of me. And right next door was an Army recruiter. And the Army recruiter was like, hey, son, you want to be in Special Forces? And I took a step back. I was like, Special Forces? I never thought about that. Like, I never considered myself to be even like be in that position. Like, of course that excites me, but I don't think I'm good enough to be in there. So I was like, tell me a little more. And he tells me more about it, tells me about the pathway. And he's like, yeah, we'll give you $25,000 right now to sign up for 6 years. And I was like, man, that's very appealing, especially back in 05. And I was like, let me go ask these guys a question real quick. And I went over to the Air Force recruiter and I was like, hey, do you guys have any special operations career fields in the Air Force? And he's like, yeah, we got PJs and controllers, but you wouldn't make it. Just stick with what you got. Just, go be a nuclear weapons apprentice. Like, most people fail out, it's a 95% attrition rate. You don't look like you would make it anyway. So just stick with what you got. And I was like, this guy, I couldn't believe the words that was coming out of his mouth. So I was like, give me this disc and give me the information and like pull back my packet, and I'll make a decision tomorrow. So I went back, looked at some of what I had or the information they gave me. And I was like, you know what? Combat control sounds really cool. I'm going to go do that. I want to be a combat controller. And so I trained, and I said, oh, that's the packet I want to put in. And you have to take a PASS test or a physical ability and stamina test. And as I took this test, or went to take the test after months of training, the recruiter's like, okay, which one are you taking? And I was like, what do you mean? I thought it was the same test. He's like, no, one's got to swim at the beginning and one's got to swim at the end. And I was like, well, what's the difference? He's like, there really is no difference. That's the only difference. So swim at the beginning or swim at the end. And I was like, okay, I've been training with swimming at the beginning. I'll do that and then I'll finish it out. And he's like, okay, cool. All right, you're going to be a PJ. And I was like, hold on a second. I thought I was going to be in to be a controller. He's like, when you get through basic, you get there, you can decide what you want. It's the same thing. Don't worry about it. Just do the test and move on. And I believed him. And, and little did I know this guy was lying to me. And probably because he had no clue. And I showed up to basic and in doc, and I ended up becoming a PJ. Not entirely what I wanted to get into, but it is exactly what I should have got into, especially after the last 16 years of the career that I had. So that's a little bit about me and led it into the career path that I went into. Again, I have a twin brother and an older brother, and they went down their different pathways. But yeah, that's hopefully that answers that.
Yeah. So first of all, I don't think I knew that you were a twin. So I've got my twins that they'll be 2.5 in a month. So, and my wife has twin older brothers. They're 44, I believe.
Oh, okay.
So lot of twinning going on in our family lineage.
Oh, there you go.
But I don't think I realized that. This is a bit off topic. Well, not really off topic, but I think if you could just for a minute talk about the different ways that you can join the military, because again, I've never been in the armed services, so I don't know. But my understanding is that there's only 2 ways to join, and that is either enlisted or as an officer. Is that correct?
Yeah, so you can enlist in the military as an enlisted swine, as we like to call them.
Okay.
And so you would go to a recruiter, enlist in a career field that you would like to get into, or you can go open general. And this is speaking specifically to Air Force, and it's very similar to the other career fields. You would enlist through the recruiter, go through MEPS, which is all your planning, or at least they do all your screening, and then sign the paperwork, and then they ship you out. If you want to do the officer route, there's a couple of routes that you can do through that. So you can go to the academy, and that's the Air Force Academy, or the Naval Academy, or West Point for the Army. Go become a cadet, and it's just like college, or very similar to college, where you have school. It's just a lot of it's built on military doctrine, and you start to develop a pathway through there. And for the Air Force, typically you have a lot of academy grads become pilots, or shoot to become pilots, aim that way. And likewise, different military leaders with the Army and the Navy. And then there's another route where you can actually commission to become an officer through the recruiting process and not go through the academy, and you would just have some sort of 4-year degree to then go to a recruiter, commission into the military as a lieutenant, and then start working your way up.
Gotcha. Interesting. Gotcha. Yeah, I just think it's important for, maybe if there's any, younger people that are listening to this, maybe they're exploring joining the armed services, and so maybe that tidbit will just help give them some clarity. So appreciate that explanation.
Yeah, and anybody that's trying to join, like I would highly recommend they do research before talking to somebody. Go to a recruiter. Don't let them pressure you to sign anything yet. Go back. Nobody's holding you at gunpoint or anything like that. Like get a bunch of information, as much information as you can, specifically about terms, what the job is that you're trying to get into, because some folks end up signing up for a job that they didn't realize that they were going to get themselves into, and then they're stuck for several years doing something they did not want to do. Right.
Yeah, I stole this from somebody, but I can't remember who it was. But he's a he's like a business consultant guy. And, he said something that really resonated, and I've kind of put it into practice now. It's the 2-week rule. And the 2-week rule is when you're going to make an important decision, and obviously joining the armed services is a extremely important, life-changing, decision, I would argue. Or maybe it's an important business decision, or some kind of big personal decision. And the rule is, when you think that you want to do something, like you think you've kind of made up your mind and you want to do something, you want to take action, give yourself 2 weeks. And in that 2-week period, think about it, pray on it if that's how you are seeking guidance, talk to other people, do whatever you got to do in that 2-week period, and then make your final decision. And that's been pretty helpful, just to say, all right, like, I think I want to roll this out, but my 2-week period starts today. Let me ponder it a little bit more for the next 2 weeks. And if I still think it's a good idea in 2 weeks, then we'll move forward with it. And if I've reflected on it and decided that it's probably not, then you can scrap it.
Yeah, that's a great principle to live by. I think I do the same thing, except mine's down to a 72-hour rule. And I have to have a solid workout in between there, really crush myself, and then get some clarity that way. And that applied for, at the end of my story about why I started up the nonprofit to begin with, that applied. I gave myself 72 hours to make a decision, and then ultimately made a life-changing decision that led me down the path that I'm on now.
Yeah. Yep. We want to hear all about that. One thing I wanted to ask you about just before we dive into what you're doing now. So you mentioned PJs a couple times. I'm thinking there's probably some people that don't know exactly what that is. So talk to us a little bit about what's a PJ and what were you doing when you were in the Air Force?
Yeah, so a lot of folks don't know that there's special operations career fields in the Air Force, and not just special operations. I go not belittling or taking away from everything, but you have Air Force special operations where you have aircraft and people fly on special aircraft, and then you have a ground element, and then the two I referenced was combat control and pararescue, and those were the more notable special operations career fields. They start to expand now into special reconnaissance, TACP, those types of career pathways. But your two notable ones are combat control and pararescue. And pararescue or PJ is short for pararescue jumper, and that's what we're typically referred to as. And if you can imagine everything that a SEAL would do, we do the very same thing, only we're dedicated technical rescue specialists. So when I started the pipeline of training in 2005, I finished in early 2008, and that's 2.5 years of training. And I didn't fail anything. It was everything I did the first time. So that was a very fast track. And you do airborne school, you do military free fall, survival, underwater survival, EMT basic, EMT paramedic, pararescue apprentice course, INDOC, and then I'm sure I'm missing something. Dive school, combat dive school. So you get all the qualifications, and then you got to go out to your units. And at your units, you're training just the same at all of those things, but not just learning how to do it. Now you're learning how to be proficient at it. So every single thing that you're doing, you're trying to maintain currencies. As far as flying in a helicopter, you're responsible for putting people out as far as a fast rope or rappelling out of the helicopter. Jumping, so if you're doing a static line jump or a free fall jump, there's different levels of progression there. So you can become a jump master, free fall jump master, dive, so you can become a dive soup. So there's all these upgrades that you can dive into, but ultimately leading to our end goal and an end objective, which our mission is to save, which it used to be saved down and injured aircrew members behind enemy lines. In today's fight, there are no enemy lines, and very rarely are aircrew members getting shot down. So we've adapted to all members, whether that's a downed aircraft or an IED explosion on a vehicle or an injured soldier on the ground or a mass casualty or a dive mission or even a stateside civil SAR rescue mission, we're trained in all aspects of rescue in a deployed and civilian setting for peacetime. So even when we're back home, we're on an alert in case something like a hurricane takes off or flooding, like in Kentucky recently. You had a bunch of floods and you had a bunch of PJs deploy and go actually help with those. Any natural disaster, there's probably some sort of pararescue unit that is going out to go help assist with the rescue. Even that Thai, all the 13 kids in the Thai cave rescue, you had a PJ team and a PJ squadron that was actually helping run that rescue effort. So a lot of my missions, especially when we were hot and heavy in the war in the early 2000s to 2015, it was all casualty evacuation or CASEVAC, flying directly to a point of injury, doing an extrication on the vehicle or a mass casualty or somebody got shot, a dog fell in a well or something like that. We're treating animals or treating humans. All of those things we're doing to get to the patient and then treat them, stabilize them, and bring them back to the hospital.
Gotcha. Wow. Although nowadays they may not be, jumping out of the airplane, and parachuting down, they're showing up and they're doing really important work, mostly around, like you said, kind of rescues and managing high, stress, high intensity, situations, like you said, a flood or some kind of natural disaster or something like that.
Yeah, you'd actually be pretty surprised. Actually, this past several years, there's actually been more jump missions than any other missions. So in a lot of missions that you don't hear about on the news, at the unit that I was at and the sister services that I was a part of and deploying with, we actually did several jump missions into different areas, searching and hunting high value targets. So in the environment in Afghanistan where I was deploying and rescuing down and injured Americans and coalition forces, I went to a unit where now we're hunting high value targets, going for hostage rescues and things like that. So we're deploying, and then we're doing these high risk missions or at least very risky missions. We're involved free fall infills, and less treating the good guys and more so hunting the bad guys. And that's what the shift of my career was into. And even so, you also have the Alaska unit, and the Alaska unit is arguably the most busy unit in the entire PJ organization, where they are always every week doing some sort of mission out into the unknown wilderness of Alaska, which most of them are long time distance problems where they're having to jump in a team of PJs and combat rescue officers where they're having to sustain themselves over a period of a week, treating a bear mauling or somebody who's lost or somebody who's gotten injured during a skiing or climbing accident, doing all these different things in austere environment, from jumping in and all of their equipment and then pulling themselves to a location where a helicopter can now pick them up. Pretty wild.
Yeah, that is wild. That's interesting, man. Very cool. I had no clue that the military, would get involved in those kinds of operations, rescuing civilians from right here on our own soil. So, yeah, very cool. I did not know that. So Steve, talk to us about maybe specifically around like your experience in the Air Force, the things that happened to you that led you, it motivated you to be doing what you're doing right now. And then that'll probably take us up to a break, whatever, about 5-ish minutes. And then from there, after we come back from break, we'll get right into what you guys are up to now.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks. So like I said, I spent 16 years doing this job, and over that 16 years, I deployed 10 times. All of those were to combat zones, several times to Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Yemen, East Africa, Lebanon, all those places fighting different terrorist organizations on the planet. And over those years, I lost several teammates, up to 15 was my last count. And so after burying all these teammates and experiencing all these TBIs and micro TBIs and going from stress levels up here, back down, up here, back down, deployment cycles, coming back home, training cycles, it really started to wear on me. And where I noticed it was in my memory. So my memory started to fade significantly. And there was people that I would have known for several years, up to 10 years. I have known them and I would see them and I would not remember how I knew them. I would not remember their name, and it was embarrassing because I should know who they are. I've interacted, they're close friends of mine, but I just couldn't recall it. And so that was a very concerning moment in my life where I was embarrassed to talk to people because I didn't remember who they were. And in my unit that I was at, that I described earlier or referenced earlier, we had a huge and robust human performance staff, which had strength conditioning coaches, physical therapists, nutritionists or dietitians. You had psychologists and all these different specialists really working hard to keep us operating at a high level. And I reached out to the psychologist and the neuropsychologist and said, hey, I can't remember people that I've known for a long period of time. What is going on with me? And we took a really in-depth cognitive test. And at the end of the test, they're like, you perform superior in all these aspects, except for one, which is attentiveness, and specifically long-term attentiveness. Mm-hmm. And that is indicative of PTSD. And I said, I don't have that. And, I normalized everything because I looked at the TV and the movies and I said, hey, I'm not wigging out at night. I'm not going through these wild flashbacks and whatnot. And I didn't think I had any issues wrong with me. And so as I ended up seeing the psychologist anyway, based off of their recommendation and just diving into some of my past. And I was very resistant at first. And as she started to peel back these layers, she started to really highlight some symptoms that I didn't really think were symptoms. I was disconnected from my family. I didn't enjoy doing my job. I had some significant sleep disorders. I had sleep apnea. I had nightmares. I would have flashbacks that I didn't realize I was having. I had the memory loss, depression, and anxiety, all of these things that were listing out. And I didn't realize I had them, especially the irritability. And so as I was like, okay, well, what do I do about this? Started to see the psychologist regularly and address a lot of those symptoms. And I started to feel better and enjoy my job again. I was the team leader of a group of PJs and controllers. And that's when, we were coming back from deployment and we wanted to build up a morale trip and really get the team unity going together. So we set up a climbing trip and a mountain rescue course out in Boise, Idaho. And it was more so the team just to come back together and teach each other some things and bond and grow as a team. And so as we set up that trip, we worked on a few objectives, mostly lead climbing and mountain rescue, and really great trip. But on the second day, we had an accident. And so just let me know if we start coming to time to take a break before I dive into this badly. And on that second day, we finished up the climbs of the day, and one of our guys had set up an anchor with a rappel line. And the anchor being, there's a piece of protection inside of a rock over here, and another nut and piece of protection inside of a rock over here with rope going towards and tied off in a knot. And then you had our long rappel rope going off of that. So guys were rappelling off the long rope on a 70-foot face. One guy gets down safely, and I'm doing some instruction over with another one of our PJs, and the second guy starts his rappel. And as he starts his rappel, he feels the anchor shift a little bit, asks if we're good to go. Our Peter checks us to make sure it was good to go, and he said, "Yep, everything's fine. We're looking good." And made us a silly joke to the guy that was on the rope because he was a controller. And then as he started his rappel, he got about halfway down, and then that anchor where the rock, or at least the pieces that were inside the rock, exploded. The rock around it exploded, and it came out. So that came loose, and now the rope is hanging on nothing. It's free flowing. So he fell about 20 to 30 feet, and luckily there was rocks that were like right below him that he was able to absorb some of his impact, but still had injuries when he landed. We didn't anticipate was Peter was doing what he was trained to do. He was tied into the anchor at the very top. So the weight of one of our other guys, as he fell, it pulled Peter off the very top. So he fell a full 70 feet, flipping over, landing on his back, bouncing over to his face down below. And so as I watched him fall, and I'll never forget what his actions as he went over the edge, as he dipped his head. It looked like he was looking to aim to get to a slope where he would absorb his impact, and he was able to roll down a little bit. Looked like he was calculating how he wanted to land. He was a very smart individual, very good at what he did, very intelligent, very skilled. And so as he flipped over and hit the rock, all I was doing was calculating injuries in my head that I was going to have to treat. And so when he hit the rock and bounced over to his face, I knew right there we're going to have a broken back, probably a broken neck, and some a head injury of some sort. And I could hear him groan. So I thought, okay, he didn't die on impact. He's going to be in pain, and maybe he's paralyzed from the chest down or something like that. So I gave some instructions up top to one of our guys down below and told him to go check for heart rate, listen for him breathing, and just stay there and don't move him. I talked to my PJ that was up top, gave him some instructions for when he got down, and then I rappelled down, got down to the bottom. And as I started to rappel, the individual who's holding his pulse and listening for his breathing said, "Hey, he lost the pulse." And so I said, "Oh, just leave him there. I'll be there in just a second." So got to him, checked and listened myself, nothing. And we rolled him over. And as I rolled him over, I could feel he had a broken neck. You could see he had several other injuries and some to his face. Checked, listened again, and still nothing. And that's when we started CPR. As we started CPR, called up 911 and started listening, or at least asking dispatch for them to launch a helicopter. And typically in all of our training iterations, we always try to go over a med plan. And a lot of times it's, we call 911 and we have life flight show up and everything's good and they understand who we are and this is how it goes. And that wasn't reality. And so now, anytime I give anybody feedback, I give them the experience of what I experienced, where we had life flight and I was talking to the dispatch, but she wouldn't launch it because she didn't know who I was, even though I'm saying we're doing CPR and I'm a registered paramedic and I'm on the side of this cliffside and I need them right now. She needed a firefighter to get there and confirm that it is who we're saying. So as I'm arguing and pleading with this dispatcher to please launch life flight and that he is in cardiac arrest, this is my friend that I just watched fall, and I'm a paramedic, I know what I'm doing, I'm intubating him right now, and pulled out a tube and tried to put an airway in him, but I couldn't guarantee it was in his throat. And I had to make sure for his family that it was in there and it was good to go. I had to make every effort. So ultimately decided to do a surgical airway. So cut a hole in his neck and put a tube in there to make sure that that was secure. As we secured that, one of our other guys, as we bagged, we could hear some blood pooling in the lungs. So he did a finger thoracotomy or a chest tube, just without the tube in the field. So cut a hole in his left side of his chest wall and leaned him over, and you just see a bunch of blood pour out, probably about a little less than a gallon or so. We sealed it back up, put him on a litter, which is called a skedco, and then started buttoning it up as the fire department is driving back and forth, and we're trying to get their attention to come up. And mind you, we're at the top of this cliff. We're still about 400 feet up and a good 100 meters to 200 meters from the roadside. So by the time the fire department gets out of the vehicle and starts coming towards us, it's gonna be a long time. And so I'm contemplating, let's get him set up and we're just gonna set him up on this rope, and then I'm gonna attach myself to the litter and I'm gonna pretty much sprint my way down this low angle hill with him. And if I roll my ankle, break my ankle, whatever, like, we need to get him to the bottom so that the helicopter can land right there. That wasn't necessarily feasible because what was that going to gain me? We're going to lose time in CPR, and that's what he needed right then. That's the one thing that's going to save him other than an OR table. So I waited for the fire department to get up to there, and I asked one question was, hey, does your guys' lifeline have a hoist? Is it hoist capable? And they said no. And that kind of really dropped my hopes because there's no way a helicopter was going to land where we were unless they were part of the 160th Regiment. And this life flight definitely is not going to take the risk to land themselves, on a one-wheel lip landing kind of thing. So that kind of dropped my heart significantly. And as the rest of the paramedics got up to the top, they placed pads on and we suctioned out the airway and continued working them. And I asked my guys to go step aside and start cleaning up some of the gear because I didn't want them to see what I was going to see. I wanted to make sure I was going to see it, but I didn't want this to be their memory, which was the paramedic placing the AED pads on Peter and then getting the monitor reading, which I knew was going to be, a systole. So we saw it was a systole, as flatline. I asked them to double check and take out, turn it off again, double check, and again it was a systole. And as I was bagging him, I kind of looked at at him as his lips were turning blue and his face was turning blue, and watching his body relax, and kind of apologized to him and his family. I gave myself a couple minutes of thinking about what just happened and what's going to happen next. Because over the next 48 to 72 hours, I knew what was going to come my way as far as an investigation. I was going to have to protect the guys that were with me. I was going to have to get them home. I was going to have to make sure that they were mentally okay with what happened. And then knowing that Peter had a family, that he was married with a little over 1-year-old boy, and his wife was 7 or 8 months pregnant. So she was almost due. She was about to have their newborn baby. So contemplating the notification of the family and all of those things in the memorial and the funeral, and then going back home and facing his team and the squadron, it was very overwhelming. But there was the only 2 to 5 minutes that I gave myself to really take that in. And then got up and made the phone call, the hardest phone call I've ever had to make, which is call my boss and tell him that one of our teammates fell off a cliffside and passed away in training. So that's what we did. Made that call and got him down to off the side of the mountain, got him to the roadside, and did what I typically have done with many other coalition and Americans, which was put him in a body bag, pin a U.S. flag on his body bag, salute him as he was placed in the mortuary affairs van. And then I called my boss again and pretty much said, this is the last flag I'm going to pin on a body bag and on a teammate. I don't want to do this anymore. And I tried to quit. That was it. That was all, that was the straw that broke the camel's back for me in my career.
Yeah. Wow, man. Well, it's hard for most of us probably to relate to anything that you have been through, but we, just thank God that there are people like you that do what you guys have done. So we'll take a quick, about 30-45-second break here, quick call to action, and we'll jump right back into it. And we want to hear all about what you're up to now and how you're helping people that have had to deal with these types of situations.
Perfect.
Hey there, Tycoons. Austin Peterson here, co-host of Tycoons of Small Biz. If you think you have what it takes to be considered a tycoon and you're wondering how you could become a featured guest, please follow and then message us at Tycoons of Small Biz on LinkedIn. We'd love to have a conversation with you to see if it is a mutually good fit, and if so, we'll get you scheduled for an interview. If you're unsure about being a guest on our podcast, but are contemplating selling your business over the next few years and you'd like to know what your business is worth, please also follow us and then message us on LinkedIn for your no-obligation, informal valuation of your business. We look forward to hearing from you, and thanks for listening to the Tycoons of Small Biz podcast. And now, back to today's program.
All right, welcome back, Tycoons. All right, Steve. Well, thank you for setting the stage for us, man. That's super helpful. Gives us great context, and certainly helps us to understand your motivation, behind, what you're doing at Shields and Stripes. So that being said, talk to us about the transition out of the armed services and into what you're doing now, and tell us all about what you guys are up to over at Shields and Stripes.
Yeah, thank you. Absolutely. And so as we continue with the story, it kind of leads into my transition. So as I claimed I wanted to be done, my boss said I could not be. I had to lead my team out, and so what I did was pull myself off a team, and I used those resources that I described earlier at the unit, as far as the psychologists and the strength and conditioning coaches and the physiotherapists, and really worked hard at putting myself back together. And after 2.5 months or so of really diving into what had just happened, I started to feel confident enough again to take the team back, and the team wanted me back. So I took the team back, and within 24 hours of coming back as the team leader, we ended up being deployed on a no notice or short notice deployment. It was gone for about 2.5 months, where we did great things, led the team. I got regained my confidence, felt great again. I was ready to continue to work and lead these guys in combat. So as I come back from this deployment in late February, mid February, we're getting ready to deploy again in May, and the accident investigation for what happened with Peter is closing out in April. And so what they found in that investigation was that there's nothing that we could have done to change what happened, or change how it happened, or the outcome. But they needed to hold somebody accountable, they being the military as a whole, AFSOC, and they reached down and held me accountable. So they reached down and removed me from my position as team leader, and also removed me from the unit that I was at. Now, this unit, to be there, was a whole nother selection course. It's our tier 1 unit, it's the 24th Special Tactics Squadron. You work really hard to be there. It's a whole nother training pipeline to be able to work with the folks that we worked with and deploy with those folks. So that's the only place I really wanted to be. And so when I was removed, that threw me back into depression. Now I had a piece of paper that I could hold to my psychologist and say, see, it is my fault. I wanted it to be my fault. I wanted everyone to look at me like it was my fault. And now I had validation. I had what I was looking for, to throw it back in her face, and to go down my depressive route that I wanted to go down to. And so I was given 30 days to PCS, 30 days to move, uproot my family, and move them off to a new base. And that place was going to be Las Vegas. And I had been stationed there before. And that place almost ruined my relationship that I had with my wife and my family. And I knew if I went there in the mental state that I was in, that I was going to destroy myself and my family. I was going to, with all the negative influences that are available with gambling, drinking, what have you, I was going to seek those out and really destroy myself, because I was going to be in a place I didn't want to be. And so, like you referenced, that 2-week rule, I had that 72-hour rule, and I was removed from my position on a Friday, told to clean out my cages on a Saturday so that nobody could see me cleaning it out and nobody could be around cleaning it out. So not only was I fired and removed, but I was also getting this kick in the gut of pretty much all the good things I just did for this unit, deploying 7 times for this unit, and now I'm being, scalded and pretty much told I'm not allowed to come onto the compound. I'm not allowed to have my friends and teammates there with me while I remove my stuff from the cages. It was a very dark and lonely time. And so on the Sunday, I made the decision, over that 72 hours, like that's not the way. Um, I'm going to just get out. I'm going to pursue a medical retirement with my psychologist. I had all of the symptoms of PTSD to back it up. And we pursued that medical retirement with no goal, like no idea what I was going to do afterwards. I didn't know how long the retirement process is going to work. I didn't know what I was going to do when I got out. I just knew what I couldn't do, which was go down this dark path. So I was able to keep those resources that I had for another almost a year, um, while I pursued my route out of the military. And as I pursued my route out, I was able to go to a couple places, one being Exos for shoulder rehab, developed a relationship there with them, as far as physical conditioning and rehab goes, and just maintain that relationship. And as I approached my tenure out within the last 3 months out, on my way out, knew I was going to lose those resources that I was using so much, and I was going to be stuck to the VA. And so I called up my friends and asked, "Hey, what are you guys doing now that you're out? Like, how do you keep yourself together? How do you use the resources that we used so much?" And they listed all the different nonprofits and organizations that they use, and I was like, "Gosh, that's a lot. Like, that seems like a lot of applications to fill out and a lot of processes to go through that I don't have the bandwidth, I don't have the time, and I don't have the will and motivation to do all that stuff. And there's got to be a better way." So I did a little bit of research on my own, and there was nothing else out there. So I opted to decide, hey, I want to just start something. I want to start it for veterans, um, that mostly never used what we had at the unit or never knew that things like that existed. And I wanted to also do it for law enforcement because like I said early on, my dad spent 30 years in law enforcement, most of that being gang task force. And as I looked at my symptoms of PTSD and I looked back at my childhood, I was like, man, my dad probably had some significant PTSD that he didn't realize he had. And man, if he had the resources that I had, it would have, not that my childhood was bad, but man, it would have changed a lot of his perspective. Like a lot of his paranoia and a lot of his telling no, saying no, and not wanting to do anything, and kind of being like depressed, or it could just been a lot different, a lot less irritable. So I was like, I got to do something for them because they don't even know something like this exists. And likewise with firefighters, firefighters see things constantly, on a weekly basis, terrible things that they normalize. I know that life, and I have a lot of friends that are firefighters, and going out to, whether it's a house fire or a wreckage that a family's involved in, or trying to save a child from choking or drowning or something like that, it's got to be devastating to them over and over, to this repeated traumas. So I contacted an individual as I did some research, Dr. Jennifer Byrne, who had the same passion or similar passion. She had another company on the side. And I was like, hey, what are you doing with this company? She was trying to give me some tips. And ultimately I was like, Jen, like, I'm not a doctor. I'm just a dude with an idea and an executioner. Like, I like to execute. Will you like join me in the cause of starting up this nonprofit to do what we want to do to help the people we want to help? And she said, for sure. So she became my co-founder, called up another one of my best buds and asked if he wants to join and help out. And so there we had a trio of starting the nonprofit. And I didn't know the first thing about starting this whole thing, but I kept getting like, hey, you just need to go out and execute. You just need to go out and do that. And eventually I asked one of my mentors, like, how do I do that? Like, is there a building I got to go to? Is there like somebody I talk to? You got a phone number of a guy I can call or a girl I can call? Like, what do I do? It's like, oh, just go to LegalZoom and just start a nonprofit that way. And so I did that, and I did it wrong. I actually started an LLC, and that's not the pathway. And I was like, I thought you could create an LLC and then turn it into a 501c3. That was wrong. So I had to dissolve the LLC, start a 501c3, apply for that. And that went up to the Secretary of State. And I was like, okay, we got paperwork in, we got a name, we got a logo, things are looking good. We got the federal application now to get a federal approval. And I looked at the application, and I might as well been looking at code because I was like, I don't know what any of this means. And so I got a recommendation to a tax attorney, called him up and was like, hey, can you help me fill this thing out? And he's like, for sure. Just send me over your bylaws. And I was like, what are bylaws? And he's like, well, it's what governs your board. And I was like, well, what's a board? And so he gave me some help and some tips. And then I was like, all right, well, cool. I called up a few of my best buds and we started up kind of a board and wrote out our bylaws and created our first meeting just to get the ball rolling, and submitted the application in, and submitted it in April of last year, and then got it approved in September, federally approved. And then we grew exponentially from there. And now we actually have a real board as opposed to like my best buds that were helping me out. And then we have real bylaws, and all those things kind of came together, and this steep learning curve took effect. But that's where we are now, as far as at least the inception of how it started.
Yeah, very cool, man. Well, just due to the fact that we don't have a ton of time left, let me just serve it right back to you and just say, tell us what are you guys actually doing in Shields and Stripes, and who are you guys, helping specifically?
Yeah, I'll be quick. So we're servicing, like I said, veterans and active duty members, both military, police officers, and firefighters that have some sort of service related trauma, and it could be it's a very vague. So it could be any kind of trauma experience. Actually, a lot of our traumas are sexual assaults traumas, which are just as traumatic as exposure to violence and things like that. So treating those type of traumas or symptoms of trauma by bringing them out to, as I referenced, Exos. Exos is a performance institute that typically handles professional athletes, most notably NFL. And that's all physical, strength conditioning, physical therapy, nutrition, recovery modalities, all of that. So I build that relation up, ask them, hey, can we use your facility to bring these folks in for 3 weeks at a time, and then use those coaches, the strength conditioning program, the physical therapists, the nutrition, get fed on site. And they're like, absolutely, bring them out. And so I've then reached out, as Jen developed a therapy team, we've got psychologists and social workers and occupational therapists that we now fly out to be in person on site for those 3 weeks at Exos, and they get all of those strength and physical components. And then in the afternoons, they do individual and group therapy for 3 weeks, and they get fed, and they're staying in a 5-star resort. And it's really a pickup out of the environment that they're destroying themselves in, put them in a place where they can reset, figure out this is what it should look like as far as, your consumption of the foods that you're eating, how you should train, how you should deal with the symptoms that you're dealing with, and tools to cope with the traumas that you have. And then we send them back home and continue with those same modalities of treatment through a telehealth setting for another 9 weeks. So it's 3 months total of treatment, but the 9 weeks now we include the family, and they have the same clinicians, same psychologist. We have a dietitian. We still have a strength conditioning coach, and then we also do blood labs and things like that, occupational therapy strategies on stress management and stuff like that. So they get all this stuff over the period of 3 months, and it's a complete reset of their mind and their body and their spirit, of how to cope with everything at home. So we've done 3 cohorts so far. We've got another one planned in January. And these ones we run between 6 and 8 personnel at a time. And we're always taking applications on our website at www.shieldsandstripes.org. And so you apply, and that goes to our clinicians, who will then screen it and then reach out to you as far as what the next steps are. And so most of these folks that have reached out to us, at least I would venture to say about half of them have had previous suicide attempts, trying to take their own lives. Every single one of them, we've changed their lives. We don't just cut them off after three months. We check up at 6 months, 9 months, and a year, to make sure that they're still progressing in their growth with their family, their mental state, their physical state. And if for some reason they do start to have a hard time and they fall into some sort of substance abuse, we do pay for them to go to another place that we find will help them out. Like Warrior's Heart would be a great example of sending somebody there with some sort of substance abuse that they need some sort of inpatient care.
What does it cost for you to put together and facilitate one of these cohorts. You said it's about 6 to 8 people.
Yep.
And initially it's about a 3-month program. So what does it cost to send a cohort through this program?
Yeah, so individually, just depending, and a lot of the costs depend on, our travel costs or, agreements with different hotels, because we put them in a resort hotel because I believe that's just as healing as the therapy itself. But ultimately the cost ranges between $15,000 and $18,000 per person. And we do fundraisers. Nobody on the staff gets a salary or anything like that. We have several fundraisers that we put on. All of that money goes to paying for their flights, pays for the contract with Exos, pays for their meals, the hotel, their travel to and from the hotel and Exos itself, and then the clinicians that are on site. So all of that money goes towards them and the program itself. And we just do several fundraisers like golf tournaments, galas, little pop-up booth venues to try to raise those funds.
Got it. Well, if you, I'll throw this out there. If you want to come out to Vegas and do like a golf tournament or something, we will, Backbone Planning Partners, we will be happy to support, to sponsor, help coordinate and plan it, show up and volunteer, maybe hit a few golf balls too. So I'll throw that out there. But yeah, Steve, unfortunately, we're kind of pressed up against the end of our time here together. But I just recall having our preliminary discussion before we talked today, of course, and you kind of gave me some examples of some of these guys and gals that you plugged into the program, and you really just painted this picture for me of just understanding how they moved through the process and how the different stages in the process had different impacts on them and stuff. So I will just say in closing that everything that you have shared with me seems like you guys are just doing really incredibly impactful and meaningful work for these folks and their families. So please continue to do what you guys are doing. And if anybody wants to reach out and connect with you, or maybe has a desire or an interest in donating, or wants to see where your events are going to be held, what's the best way for them to track that information down?
Yeah, the best way would be on our website, www.shieldsandstripes.org, all written out. And that'll have different links to the LinkedIn and Instagram page if you guys follow that social media type stuff. And then you're welcome to search me up on LinkedIn, Steven Nisbet, Nisbet. Find me on there. Please connect. I don't have a lot of friends on there, so I'm not at the 30,000 mark where I have to send a message and say I'm too cool. So please, I'm open to connections and reaching out.
Yeah.
But thank you for having me. And one thing that I like to add is just one thing that makes us different is the time difference. I know 3 months is a long time, but a 3 to 5 day vacation that a lot of folks offer, and they're great, or a lot of nonprofits offer, are great, but they certainly aren't preventing an individual from taking their own life. You need tools, and you need coping mechanisms, and you need a reset to be able to do that. So, that's what sets us apart.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for sharing that. And I encourage all you tycoons out there to track Steve down on LinkedIn and go check out their website. And if it's within you, it's your desire, then let's all see if we can find a way to donate to their cause, because it's meaningful, and they're changing the lives of these young folks that have been through some pretty traumatic stuff. So Steve, thank you so much for joining, man. Really appreciate you. It's been great getting to know you a bit more. And I can attest that you have at least one friend on LinkedIn, because I know that we are connected there. So yeah, appreciate you, man. And yeah, that's actually how I found you, was on LinkedIn, and immediately was attracted to you and your story. So keep up the great work, brother. Appreciate you. Thank you again for your service. And let's have you on the show again sometime in the future, man.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome to.
You've been listening to Tycoons of Small Biz, a podcast for small business owners by small business owners. Join us every Tuesday at 1 p.m. Arizona time for an introduction to another great tycoon. And be sure to follow us on our social media channels for links to all of our episodes and great content.